Welcome to Let's Talk About It. Broadcasting live from North Nashville, Tennessee. North Nashville spans from Metro Center down to the border of Bicentennial Mall, including the neighborhoods of Bordeaux, Buena Vista, Parkwood Estates, Germantown, Haynes Manor, Jefferson Street, Fisk Park, Cumberland Gardens, Oak Valley, Enchanted Hill, and many others. It's perhaps best known for the 3 universities housed here, including Tennessee State University, Fisk University, and Meharry Medical College. North Nashville is also home to the Tennessee Titans practice facility. The Tennessee Titans will begin construction on an expansion project at St. Thomas Sports Park, which will almost double its current footprint in Nashville's Metro Center neighborhood. The plan includes 60,000 square feet in additions, including a new building situated along one of the practice fields, and major renovation of spaces within the existing 75,000 square foot building.
Now live from North Nashville, Dr. William Head. Let's talk about it.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About It. Here we are in beautiful North Nashville, Tennessee, not to be confused with North Little Rock, Arkansas, which is an entity unto itself. North Nashville is the northern quadrant of the Davidson County and houses many of the people of color in the county. Got a little something for you to think about. The University of Georgia has a ballot out that has 3 names on it as the alumnus of the year. At the top of the list is Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene, Herschel Walker, and Matthew Stafford, a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Wonder what the outcome will be. I'm sure that the University of Georgia is very proud of Ms. Greene and Mr. Walker, so Mr. Stafford may have to take a back seat. Wouldn't that be something? Would not that be something? The Scarlet Letter is a play in which the heroine of the story is found guilty of being involved in an inappropriate relationship as an adulteress. As a result, she got this big red A plastered to her forehead. What happened to the guy? Wasn't he present when this adulterous relationship was going on? Makes you wonder, ladies, where the American Taliban is taking us. The woman with the issue of blood was not availed the unfettered access to Jesus because she was a woman. She had to crawl and creep and reach and fight her way through men who were directly in her way to touch the hem of her Savior's garment. She had to fight through men for access to Jesus. Where do you think these people are taking you? Are we going back to that level of ignorance? Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene will find herself without an opportunity to run for office or do anything else to that matter without getting her husband's permission. Sounds strange to me. Jesus in John 8:7 said, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. He who is among you, forgot there were nothing but men present to punish a woman for, again, adultery. Where's the men? Remember the little old lady who used to do the Wendy commercial that said, "Where's the beef?" In this situation, where are the men? Where's the man that was the other side of this adulterous relationship? Ladies, is this where the American Taliban is taking us? Strange. It's amazing that we're going backwards, regression, going back in time to when the only people that were covered by we the people were rich, white, land-owning males. In that time and that day, women couldn't own land, so they didn't count. Of course, people of color were slaves. So we're going back to taking away a woman's rights, along with the rights of the whole country to vote in elections, free elections. The woman who was an adulteress and was about to be stoned to death was being stoned to death at the hands of a group of men. Women could not be judges, could not be witnesses. They could not be lawyers for the defendant. All you ladies who are women, who are lawyers, judges, and who question witnesses, credible witnesses with professional documentation. Is that where we're going? Back to the fact that you cannot be part of the process? But now we come to the one man in the whole situation here. Judge Kavanaugh felt he had the right to penalize women by taking away their right to abortions. But he did not realize that he set himself up, as he found out when he was having dinner in a Washington, D.C. restaurant. He thought he could throw a rock and hide his hands. Unfortunately, he was seen. And now he is hearing. As the head of the American Taliban, take it to him, ladies. Keep him on the run. Make sure that he knows your displeasure. Make sure that the 195 Republicans who voted down the right for right to, I just wrote it down, now I can't remember it. The right to contraception law, which was voted down by the Republicans, 195 of them. Listen to what I'm saying. Find out how your senator and how your rep voted and give them the what for, since they figured that they're going to make you have babies so that they can find a new electorate. Right now, you are 55% of the electorate. You will continue to be the largest portion of the electorate. And you need to, this year, in 2024 midterm elections, make sure that your view, your point of view, your interests are represented by the people that get elected. And I've seen the women in this country respond to this idiocy. Do not allow the American Taliban to rule everybody's life on a very thin veil of sexism, racism, classism, all the isms you can think of. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Today we have one of my good friends, Reverend Dr. Donna. Reverend Dr. Whitney is an MD and a master's degree recipient of the Vanderbilt School of Divinity, recently a master's degree graduate. Good afternoon, Donna. How are you?
I'm fine in spite of the heat, thank you. How are you?
I'm feeling as people like to say now, and I don't understand it, but I'm beginning to. I'm feeling some kind of way as this thing is getting to be just too stupid for words. Well, you may respond to my last. Let me go back. I'm feeling some kind of way because the situation in this country is becoming very disturbing. You gave me some news just a minute ago about the Right to Contraception Act. Tell the audience what you have picked up from that.
In Washington today, the House of Representatives voted on the Right to Contraception Act. It did pass the House. However, 195 Republican legislators voted against it, and that would include all but 2 of our representatives from Tennessee. And if you like, I will read the names of those who voted against the Right to Contraception Act.
Well,
They are
go right ahead.
Diana Harshberger, District 1, Tim Burchett, District 2, Charles Fleischman, District 3, Scott Desjardins, District 4, John Rose, District 6, and Mark Green, District 7. Apparently those people don't think that we have the right to access to contraception in the United States.
How many women did you name in that group?
Approximately 0.
Approximately 0. None of the people who voted against it ever has to take contraceptive drugs, nor have a child. So what's their problem with it if they don't have to do it? I don't think they have the right to decide that, but the system says they do.
Yep.
Over the years, at least the last 10 years, I have noted the anti-abortion lobby a lot more than I had in the past. Can you give us a little view of the history of the anti-abortion movement in this country?
Yes, absolutely. And your perception is correct. They haven't been as noticeable until recently. So I want to start, as you've asked me to, by speaking about the history of abortion rights in the United States and focus in particular on the ways in which that movement is tied to the movement for white supremacy, particularly since the 1980s. That's a story that's not widely known, but really should be known. And so once we can establish that historical and cultural context, then I also want to talk about a related topic, if you will indulge me, which is the demographics of reproductive outcomes in this country, compared externally with comparable nations, and then also focusing internally on racial disparities and how the statistics play out. And then once we've established all that context, let's take time to talk about the recent Dobbs decision and its implications for women around the country now and in generations to come. So with respect to history, William, abortion was legal in the United States up until just after the Civil War. It was in 1873 under the Grant administration that the Comstock Act made it illegal to use the U.S. Postal Service to mail anything that could be used for abortion, as well as to mail contraceptives or anything else that was deemed to be obscene. How about that?
Obscene?
And then,
okay.
Yeah, their language, not mine. So once the Comstock Act was passed, then there were laws passed in multiple states outlawing abortion altogether. And these laws, the impetus to pass these laws was fueled by doctors who wanted to take reproductive care out of the hands of midwives. So that's that early history. But of course, abortion didn't go away when it was made illegal. It just went underground. And in the 1930s, there were approximately 1 million abortions performed in this country, with the primary driving factor being economic distress, because women just couldn't afford to have children. And then in the late 1960s, the numbers of abortions increased even more because of the adverse effects of thalidomide on fetuses, and also because of the adverse effects from the measles epidemic on fetuses in utero. So in 1965, there was a broadcast by Walter Cronkite. Remember him? I loved Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite, he reported on what he called an abortion epidemic of 1 million abortions in that year, which, as I said, was 1965. So until the Roe decision in 1973, laws regulating abortion varied from state to state, as you know. And I will say that even those who supported the Roe decision, which I certainly did, conceded that the legal reasoning behind it was open to challenge. And so there was always the hope that there would be a legislative solution to emerge, but that, that would protect abortion more solidly, but no such solution ever emerged. And that brings us now to the fact that on June 24th, the Supreme Court, as you know, in the Dobbs decision, opened the way for states to completely restrict abortion if they want to. And at the time of that decision, there were trigger laws in place in 13 states that would immediately outlaw abortion, and 13 more states were poised to enact similar legislation. And that will leave 36 million American women without access to abortion in their own states, and in many cases, even anywhere near their own states.
Was the reasoning of the court, in your mind, at all well considered? I mean, what they came up with was simply, it was wrong in the first place, which doesn't explain anything that they did.
Well, I'm not a legal scholar, so I'm going to leave that one alone, William, and return to a question that I do want to address, because you've asked a question and I've only begun to sort of tiptoe around it. But let's now talk about the anti-abortion movement that you've noticed accelerating in the last couple of decades, because that's where the link between the anti-abortion movement and the defense of white supremacy begin to intersect.
Okay.
So the anti-abortion movement, as we know it, is closely associated in the public imagination with conservative Christianity. But that has not always been the case. The conservative Christian movement to ban abortion didn't gain significant momentum until the late 1980s, and we'll see in a minute what it was in the 1980s that prompted that. As early as 1961, the National Council of Churches issued a resolution calling for legalized abortion in cases of rape, incest, serious birth defect, or risk of physical or emotional harm to a woman. At around that same time, late 60s, early 70s, conservative Christians were more or less indifferent to abortion. It just wasn't particularly on the conservative Christian radar at that time. During the years surrounding Roe, polls of conservative Christians showed actually overwhelming support for legalized abortion. And I'll give you some statistics. There was a poll in 1970 of the clergy, mind you, of the Southern Baptist Convention, And it showed that 70% supported access to abortion to support the physical or mental health of a woman. 64% of, again, clergy supported abortion in cases of severe fetal abnormality, and 71% of Southern Baptist clergy supported abortion in cases of rape. In 1971, the Southern Baptist Convention ratified a resolution similar to the one that the National Council of Churches had ratified, calling for legalization of abortion in cases of rape, incest, severe fetal abnormality, or risk to the physical or emotional health of the woman. This is the Southern Baptist Convention in 1971 issuing a resolution calling for legalized abortion in a fairly wide range of circumstances. The Southern Baptist Convention reaffirmed that resolution twice, once in 1974, shortly after Roe, and then again in 1976. So you might ask, what changed? Because you and I have both seen a fairly robust anti-abortion movement coming out of conservative Christian circles for the last 20 years or so, more than. So the catalyst for change had absolutely nothing to do with abortion itself. In 1983, the Supreme Court sided against Bob Jones University in a case that had to do with segregation. And what the court said was that any nonprofit university that practiced racial segregation or enforced racial discrimination in its admission policies could not qualify for tax-exempt status. That was in 1983. And the ruling infuriated right-wing thinkers who were committed to white supremacy. So they looked for a way to mobilize what they thought would be a sympathetic base, namely a conservative Christian base, without explicitly having to endorse white supremacy or even mention race. By now, a familiar tactic. So they looked for a way to do this, and to begin that search, a bunch of right-wing Christians gathered privately in 1990 to craft a strategy to basically remake and dominate the social and cultural and political landscape of the United States. The gathering included, I'll just name a few names that might be familiar to you, Paul Weyrich, co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, Ralph Reed, the executive director of the Christian Coalition, and Richard Land, the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, and of course others. And what they landed on was that they could use abortion as a way of harnessing the anger over the Bob Jones University decision without having to say a word about race. In other words, their concerns were never primarily about abortion, but about threats to the racist status quo of the United States of America. Abortion was a dog whistle. Be very clear about that. Abortion was a dog whistle issue brought forward to harness white supremacist energies, that is to say, white supremacist rage, without having to ever speak directly about race or white supremacy. And the strategy worked, as you have seen. And that being the case, I want to say, I don't know if you listened or watched any of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings on abortion last week. During that session, Senator Ted Cruz and others claimed that what they called the abortion industry, which of course doesn't exist, disproportionately harms black women. That claim is completely disingenuous and bends the history of this country in a 180-degree hairpin turn to obfuscate the truth. So if it's okay with you for me to continue, what I want to talk about is the actual demographics of reproductive outcomes in this country. And the statistics do not speak well for us. Maternal mortality across the nation is higher than in any comparable country in the world. Nearly 300% higher than the maternal mortality rate in Canada, just to our north, and a staggering 17 times the rate in Poland. Like Poland! Poland does 17 times better than we do in terms of maternal mortality. And with respect to infant mortality, the United States ranks near the very bottom of the OECD nations, that's Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We are number 33 out of those 36 nations. And 33 is not near the top, it is near the bottom. In the last 25 years, these statistics have only gotten worse in the United States, not better, worse over the last quarter of a century. And in states with the most restrictive laws concerning abortion, those maternal and infant mortality rates are on the average 7% higher than the national average. With respect to maternal and infant mortality inside the United States, Black women and babies fare 3 to 4 times worse than their white counterparts, largely as the result of factors connected to systemic racism that disproportionately burdens Black women with poverty and the things that come with poverty, such as inadequate access to nutrition, medical care, and safe housing. And then if you look at rates of elective abortion, Black women in the United States have been accessing abortion 3 to 4 times more than their white counterparts as well, at least for the last several decades and maybe for longer. But contrary to what certain Republicans have said as recently as last week in the Senate Judiciary hearing that I mentioned, this is not because the so-called abortion industry, which again doesn't exist, selectively targets Black women with genocidal intent. It does not. It's because of the pernicious effects of systemic racism that cause so many Black women to find themselves without access to contraception, without access to adequate health care, without paid family leave, and excluded from the financial security that adults need in order to support children. And there's another thing that was mentioned in the Senate hearing that I want to address too. The opponents of abortion love to cite the fact that Margaret Sanger, who was an early 20th century birth control advocate, adhered to the racist ideology of eugenics. It's true, she did, but that is 100% irrelevant to the conversation in 2022. It's just not relevant. So I want to address that and lay that to rest. So is that clear about the history? Are there questions you want to ask about the connection of this anti-abortion movement out of conservative Christian circles, its connection to the quest to uphold and perpetuate white supremacy? Because that's what it's about.
I'm astounded that we are the worst, one of the worst countries in the world at taking care of our pregnant women and children, yet we want to take away the right of a woman to have an abortion in any situation, which makes no sense at all. So now what we'll have is more children who are somehow injured just by coming into this world that are going to have to be taken care of by someone. I think we need some legislation that makes all these folks that voted for all this stuff more responsible for the result of it. The Republicans are good at making laws and poor at governing. So they'll make a law and then fiddle around with it for the next 15, 20 years, never getting it right. So I'm sickened by that. As we look at the religious right, and it's hard for me to, and it may be bad for me to say, and I really don't care, but I heard my ministers say that calling yourself a Christian these days does not necessarily mean the same thing as what these people call them when these people that we're talking about call themselves Christians. It's a dichotomy of thought and action that seems to just be, for lack of a better word, ugly, frightening, stupid. I just don't understand how you go from the Christian ethos to a racist stance like it's being taken by a lot of these evangelical Christians.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time, as you know. And you mentioned one of the consequences of the Dobbs decision, which is more children being born to parents who really cannot raise them adequately, and in a society that doesn't support parents to raise children adequately. And in fact, if you look at it, a society that really does not value children. So I want to talk, if it's okay with you, a little bit more about the consequences of the Dobbs decision, because they are more far-reaching, I think, than we might realize or want to realize. The decision takes away bodily autonomy from girls and women and essentially makes us second-class citizens in the United States. In fact, the 1868 interpretation that Justice Alito based his opinion on dates from a time when, as you have already mentioned, women couldn't vote, women couldn't own property, women couldn't enter into contracts, and women were not a part of the body politic. That's the bedrock, or if you don't mind, the sinking sand on which Justice Alito's opinion rests. So what happens in the absence of bodily autonomy? In the absence of bodily autonomy, unable to end an unwanted pregnancy, young women find themselves unable to continue their education to the extent that they otherwise would have done. They miss out on the careers they would otherwise have pursued. Society misses out on the contributions they could have made. They and their families miss out on the financial stability that they could otherwise have had, and the harm continues into subsequent generations. It doesn't end with the woman who missed the opportunity to control her own body. And outlawing abortion doesn't make abortion go away. It makes it inaccessible to the poorest and most vulnerable women in our communities. And outlawing abortion makes abortion dangerous, even deadly. And outlawing abortion has more repercussions than just the outcome of any particular pregnancy. It has broad implications for women's health in general. For example, if a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, meaning a pregnancy that didn't make its way into the uterus, but is lodged typically in a fallopian tube, although it could even end up in a person's liver, and as it grows, it will rupture, hemorrhage, and potentially kill the woman. So a woman who has an ectopic pregnancy or who has an incomplete miscarriage needs intervention. And usually what she needs is intervention to end the pregnancy. But in states where abortion is allowed to preserve the life of the woman, doctors feel compelled to delay treatment until it's very clear that the woman is near death. Otherwise, they risk losing their license and face potentially criminal charges. So you find doctors having to ask themselves, well, how sick does this woman have to be before I'm allowed to treat her? So what happens? Women suffer unnecessary blood loss. A woman undergoing an incomplete miscarriage may become septic, which means that she has bacteria in her bloodstream that can kill a person. So some women will hemorrhage, some women will become septic, and some women will die. When a woman knows that her health is too fragile to support a pregnancy, but she's forced to carry that pregnancy to term anyway, that's a situation we call forced birth. I mean, that's barbaric, forced birth. It's anticipated that her risk for mortality and the risk for infant mortality will increase. And we've seen infant and maternal mortality are already pretty high in the United States. and the anticipated increase in the wake of the Dobbs decision is 20% on average and 33% for Black women. So recall that on average in the United States, there are approximately somewhere between 17 and 25 maternal deaths per 100,000. And recall again that this rate is already much higher for Black women. Keeping that in mind, for some women, forced birth is actually forced death.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost hard to keep talking after saying those sadly true words. So even in states where there are exceptions for the life of the mother, emergency care for women at risk of death for hemorrhage or sepsis is not assured. In fact, just recently, the state of Texas sued the United States Department of Health and Human Services because of its recent reminder that doctors who perform abortions as part of emergency care for the mother are exempt from criminal prosecution, even in states where abortion would otherwise be outlawed. But because the Department of Health and Human Services decided to uphold, or I should say protect doctors from criminal charges when they intervened to save the life of a mother, even that was too much for Texas Republicans. They want to call themselves pro-life, but it's very clear that they are rabidly anti-woman.
Wow.
And there's more. Some states are preparing to legislate sanctions against women who travel across state lines to obtain an abortion, as well as sanctions on those who assist them across state lines and on out-of-state doctors who treat them with abortion. So that would be like Tennessee saying that they can make the law for New York. But if legislation like that actually were allowed to stand, which a year ago I would have said probably wouldn't happen, but now I'm not so sure.
I'm not sure at all.
Yeah, I mean, what that would do is take away our constitutionally based liberty to cross state lines at will, and it would turn our internal state borders into checkpoints.
Wow. That's ignorant, to say the least. I'm glad I'm on my best behavior today because I'd have some real strong language to add to that.
I bet you do. I know you.
I know you know me. The thing that is most disturbing is the last few things that you mentioned. Forced pregnancy. The fact that forced pregnancy is going to lead to the death of women because they can't do what they need to do to protect their lives. I am getting a little emotional on that one. I just can't understand the thinking. Ladies who are listening, listen to what this medical doctor is telling you. This is not some doctor with a educational degree like me. This is an MD who is talking to you. She knows of whence she comes. So I am terribly disappointed, even more disappointed than I was before we had this little talk about the whole situation. Donna, when you think of the ramifications of this thing, where do we go to find at least a happy medium? I do know that if legislation is passed to make abortion legal in this country by the halls of Congress, that this thing will be much less of a weight on our hearts and minds. And I think the only solution is the vote. And this upcoming midterm election is right now more important than the last presidential election, in my mind.
That can't be said often enough or strongly enough, William, because so much of what happens locally, and Democrats maybe have ignored that for a while, but Republicans have had their eye on all those local prizes all along, as we have seen in the politicization of school board races, just for example. So yes, what happens locally really matters, and sometimes matters more than what happens in Washington. So yeah, everybody vote. I wish I had voted early already. I'm going to do that tomorrow. Otherwise, I would have worn my sticker for this occasion. I guess I could have pulled out an old one, but it did get a little dry.
I'm still trying to make sense of the ballot here in the state in Nashville. It is cumbersome. It is wordy. It is unworthy of all the reading you have to do to find out what the actual situation is. But I have actually read all of the Metro amendments to the Metro Nashville charter. So I've got a couple of friends who are more knowledgeable of the workings of the law in the city that I'm going to talk to before I make decisions on what I vote or don't vote for. Donna, you've been a medical doctor longer than you've been a minister. Have you ever seen the propensity of hateful legislation and misguided direction in your entire life, or am I just imagining? I think I'm older than you are.
Not that many people are older than me anymore, but okay. No, I have not seen anything like this before. And you've mentioned the fact that I have been a doctor for many years. I'm now retired, and a minister for a few years. And in neither capacity have I ever sat with a woman making a decision about her pregnancy when the decision was easy or when it was flippant. I've never sat with a woman whose decision wasn't complicated and multi-layered and nuanced. It is never easy. It doesn't make sense for a bunch of politicians, most of them male, none of them with medical expertise, and as far as I know, none of them with experience in pastoral care, to legislate this matter. A woman should be free to sit with her doctor and with whomever else she chooses, whether it's a partner, a friend, a spiritual advisor, whoever, and make her own decision in privacy and with dignity. This situation that we are facing now is inhumane. It strips women of dignity, and it really is not worth what used to be the dignity of our Supreme Court or our legislature either. We've talked about some of the implications for health, but there are other implications of the Dobbs decision as well, particularly as outlined in Justice Thomas's opinion, because it's very clear that the reasoning that takes away a constitutional right to abortion can be used, and some of the justices intend to use it, and some Republican legislators intend to use it to take away other rights that we used to think we could take for granted. One of those rights is simply the right to contraception. As you mentioned in your introduction, there was a vote today in the House of Representatives on a bill called the Right to Contraception Act. And 195 Republican legislators voted against it. Now, it did pass, and it has a chance of passing the Senate as well. but 195 Republican senators who, by their own record, oppose abortion, somehow oppose one of the very things that would make abortion rare, namely contraception. But the right to contraception isn't the only right that Justice Thomas and his ilk would consider taking away from the American people. There's also the right not just to marry a person of the same sex, but the right even to engage in consensual intimacy in private with a person of the same sex. And even, astonishingly, the right to marry a person who is not of one's own so-called race. All those things are now on the chopping block. And as you said yourself, if lawmakers and others who want to prevent abortion were actually serious about wanting to prevent abortion, then they certainly wouldn't stand in the way of liberal access to contraception. But as we've seen, this was never about abortion in the first place. It is the stepchild of the ongoing, never-ending pursuit of white supremacy in the United States of America.
Well, I tell you, it is absolutely. I thought I had been reading and understanding what was going on, but you have made some points here that all my reading and effort to understand have never even approached.
Can I recommend a book to you?
Absolutely.
There's a wonderful book that we did as a statewide book club read in the Southern Christian Coalition, not to be confused with the Christian Coalition. We're a group of progressive clergy. And in addition to speaking out, we study together. And the book we read last spring together was a book by Reverend Aubrey Hendricks, who is absolutely a brilliant theologian, teacher, scholar, and preacher. And it's called, what's it called? Let me look on my bookshelf. Christians Against Christianity. And it addresses the same topic that you addressed and attributed to our senior pastor, the way in which, under the banner of Christianity, white evangelicals in this country have entirely betrayed the teaching and faith of Jesus. And he has a particularly cogent chapter on abortion that has much of the information that you and I just shared. You can borrow my copy if you want.
If I borrow it, you may never get it back. I still have one of these.
Oh, I'll get it back. I know how to find you.
We're going to have to close, Donna, but I'm going to put you on notice now that as this thing progresses, you're going to have to come back and sit with us again. This is far too tragic an issue to drop the ball on. We really got
to close because I just wanted to tell you one more thing. It won't make you happy, but
I'm not looking for happy.
Can you give me a minute?
Go right ahead.
Okay, thanks. Because I don't want to leave us with the sense that we've talked about all of the likely consequences of the Dobbs decision. Because there's one more. Something that's been going on but is likely to escalate out of control at this point. In Tennessee and other states like it that criminalize abortion, women who seek abortion aren't prosecuted, but doctors who perform abortion are. Nonetheless, women in this country, even before Dobbs, have been prosecuted, convicted, and incarcerated for negative pregnancy outcomes, and that is only likely to increase. And I'm just going to give you 3 examples, all of whom illustrate the fact that arrests and convictions and incarceration of women for negative pregnancy outcomes, meaning usually miscarriage, disproportionately, almost exclusively target women of color and especially black women. So I'm just going to tell you about 3 women. A woman named Purvi Patel was sentenced to 20 years in Indiana, although the charges were subsequently overturned. That was after a miscarriage. Lizel Era of Texas faced similar charges, and a woman named Brittany Pulaw, a member of the Comanche Nation, was sentenced to 4 years for manslaughter for a miscarriage that occurred when she was approximately 15 weeks pregnant. And if you want to hear upside down logic, if that same woman had simply had an elective abortion, she wouldn't have been prosecuted because in her home state of Oklahoma at that time, abortion was still legal. So all of this shows an agenda that is explicitly anti-woman and criminalizes women for doing anything other than giving birth to live babies, whether they want to or not. There's an organization called the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, NAPW, that has documented at least 1,600 cases like that of Ms. Patel, Ms. Era, and Ms. Pulaw from 1973 until now, most of them occurring just in the last few years. And of the arrests of pregnant women for unwanted pregnancy outcomes, meaning usually miscarriage, 71% occurred to women who were low income, half of them occurred to women of color generally, and 52% of them occurred to Black women. Yeah. So this is not pro-life, this is anti-woman.
Yeah, I am astounded at the lowness, for lack of another word, the lowness of, and lowness being LOW, of these individual old men like me who are making decisions for women who are in childbearing years, for which they have no reference at this point in their lives other than grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It's asinine, it's backwards, it is totally outlandish. Ladies, women, females, those at any point of intersectionality, men, women, gay, and otherwise, trans, you better gather together, because this is all of our problems. All of our problems are sucked up into this one effort. So if you don't get out and march when somebody asks you to, or when the opportunity presents itself, if you don't start right now registering voters for the midterm election, it's your fault. You already know where it's going. The leakage of the Supreme Court decision before it was made told you exactly where it was going. And I've seen you start to crank up your political engine. I am telling you now, there is nothing but an emergency. Every siren in your mind should be going off. Every red, blue light in your life should be going off right now, because this next midterm election is going to determine the direction of this country for the next 8 to 10 years without any opportunity for change. If you let it happen to you, it's on you. It's on you. It's on you. I will close today, as I always do, with a quote from the late Reverend Dr. Dale P. Andrews, former Dean of Homiletics in the Vanderbilt School of Divinity, a great speaker, a passionate man, a champion of equality. I quote, "I have more questions than answers, more problems than solutions. From these, I freely share. God bless and keep. Watch your surroundings. Know where your children are. Find a place that they can go to that's safe if something jumps off. And be ready to go get them. Know where they are so you can find them and bring them to safety. God bless and keep. It is time to go to war. You've got to get those votes moving in your community. Vote these folks out of office. God bless and keep.